Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Appreciate everybody participating this morning. We have a guest presenter today. Kind of wanted to give everybody an opportunity maybe to listen in on some other types of services and things that might be of issue, for them. And today we have Darren Walrod, who is the president and owner of ACS Data Search, and that is a Kansas City-based background check company. And Darren and I have known one another for a while now, and I feel that he has a service model that is very similar to ours, and that he puts his customer service at the forefront and makes sure that he does a good job for his clientele. And I thought it would be a great opportunity because there's been a lot of talk and conversation about background checks and what is legal, what is not, trends, and so on and so forth. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to let Darren introduce his services, as well as giving you some good information as to what is happening, in this particular venue. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off right now to Darren and let him go and do his thing. So as usual, questions can be typed in the box at the end. And if a question can't be answered today, I'm sure that Darren would be more than happy to respond to you email or by phone. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Darren. Darren, go right ahead.
Jeff, thank you, and thank you to you and your company, Unemployment Insurance Services, for giving me this opportunity to talk about background checks.
Let me know. We can. All right.
What I wanted to do in this first time of showing one of these presentations is kind of give you some upper level views on a couple different items. The first one is some of the reasons why you're doing background checks. Most of you probably already doing them. If you're not, we're going to dive into that and kind of go through why it might make sense or maybe not make sense to do the background checks. And the other thing I wanted to tackle a little bit today are some of the trends I'm seeing, just to kind of give you an idea of what's kind of happening and what you might start seeing in the next year, 2 years coming down the road, that you can kind of keep an eye out for that as well. So we're going to jump right in. Why background checks? Now I put these together because I think these, for the most part, answer the questions, the concerns that most employers have when they're thinking about background checks during the employment application process. Now, background checks are an important piece of the application process. It's a great tool to make sure you're finding the right candidate for the right position. Now, most of my presentation is going to kind of concentrate on the legal type ramifications, the liability piece of it, but the reality is a good background check on a good candidate usually leads to a good employee, and that employee typically will stay around longer versus the having to refill positions, the retraining, and the costs involved with that. So again, I feel background checks along with a good application process lead to a better employee and overall a huge saving in costs of not having to continually retrain people and refill those positions. But if you look at my first point, you talk about adversely affecting the company financially. And this is a statistic I've read several times, that roughly 30% of all small companies that fail, it's due to internal theft. Someone on the inside is stealing to the point where the company goes insolvent and they're no longer in business. Second thing to think about, and maybe we don't think about these as much, is how it can adversely affect your infrastructure. These important positions that you have in your system, the information systems, the technology, compliance, HR, accounting, payroll, accounts payable, making sure that you're hiring the people that have the experience, have the knowledge, have the tools to lead those departments for your company. Hiring the wrong person, not checking their qualifications, not checking their experience, putting them in positions to where they may be not ready for, potentially can take your company a long time to turn around from. So that's a different part of it, not just checking criminal, but you're checking to make sure their work history is what it is, Their experience is what it is. Their certifications, their education is what it is. Now, the next three are the ones I think a lot of people think about when they do background checks. Safety. Safety of your employees. Hire an employee with a potentially criminal background that potentially could cause issues with the employees that he or she works with. Safety of your customers, safety of youth, elderly, and disabled. Those are where the background checks, focusing on the criminal part, really come in and really have probably some relevance to the job that they're being asked to do. So that's a big one. The next one, company liability, reputation. You know, all of these to some degree have some sort of liability. Third-party requirements. You may not want to do background checks, but at some point you may be working with a vendor, a bank, an insurance company that are going to require you to. So at some point you may not have an option, or you're running them and these institutions want you to run them more frequently post-employment. We'll talk about that. So really, you know, to me, background checks, the focus should be on determining your liability in these positions. What's worst case scenario? What do you want to learn about these? What do you want to make sure this person has before you put them in these positions? And then you check that accordingly, or you don't. I mean, that's a decision for you and your company. And as I said at the beginning, hiring the right person the first time saves money in the long run. The costs of retraining are huge expenses on companies. To get that right employee and have that right employee stay for a long time, huge benefit to the company. So again, some of the reasons and some of the questions you want to consider as you are looking at your company, looking at your different positions, the financial position. Who has access to your money, your bank accounts, your other assets? Who has access to the treasury piece of your company? Who can write checks? Who can approve purchases? Who has authority to make big decisions? Violence. Does the position have access to members of the public or co-workers where a criminal past reflects violence and could cause harm? So we kind of talked about this. Does the position require the employee to go into a customer's home, businesses, or the employee's customer facing? Does a person work with children, elderly, or those unable to care for themselves, the most vulnerable? These really are probably the most important ones when it comes to criminal background checks. Really the focus kind of is right here. Hurting others, employees, customers, the ones that are most vulnerable. Liability and reputation. So would the lack of a background check hurt the company's reputation, increase their company's liability should an incident occur? Yeah, potentially yes. Now, background checks aren't, you know, they're not 100% foolproof. You can run the best background check on somebody, everything comes back clear, and you have an employee that still can go do something and embarrass the company. But you have something to show that said, hey, we did our diligence, we did our background check. You know, we dotted all the I's and crossed the T's. Everything looked good, and this employee still did this. That's going to look a lot better in any sort of litigation scenario versus, yeah, we didn't run anything. We had no idea this was on his record. We didn't run anything. Could one incident potentially ruin a company? You know, probably not big companies, but it depends. But a small company, a small starting company, you know, a company that did those in-home care services, an incident happens, finds out the company's not been doing background checks on all their home in-care employees. Yeah, I'd say potentially that company's probably in trouble and may not be able to go on. Again, assess your liability. Then, as we talked about the first place, infrastructure. Are you hiring the right people for the right positions in your job? These important jobs, the job that compliance and legal, keeping you legal, keeping you within compliance of all the different many laws that you probably are having to follow. Your IT piece of your business, the e-commerce piece of your business, the website piece of your business, your data, keeping your data safety. One of the biggest issues right now are, you know, customer information getting stolen. Do you have the right person in charge to making sure that you have the best security out there? HR is another one. Are they very good as far as dealing with employees? Do they know the laws? Do they understand how to handle EEOC claims? Those are just examples that it shows the importance of, you're just not looking for criminal. You're looking for people. You're verifying their experience. You're verifying their work history. You're verifying the time that they were on work. You want to, this all kind of paints a picture of this employee, and you want to make sure, again, you hire the right employee the first time. With all that being said, one thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind is that different levels of authority, access, and responsibility should lead to different types of background checks. But what you're running on a customer service rep could definitely be very different than what you're running on your accountant director. Could be different than what you're running on a new C-level officer that you hire. And most background check companies will set you guys up for different types of background checks. They certainly should be able to help you determine which background checks make the most sense for the different positions within your company. So if they're not, if you have a one background check and you're running the same thing on all of them, I'd look at that. You may be able to save some money by not having one that's as robust that needs to be on certain employees within your company, or the other way around, the one you're running, maybe it needs to be a little bit more robust on some of the positions that you are hiring. So it's something to consider, something to take a look back. Again, common theme, what is your liability? What is worst case scenario? And kind of work backwards. Do your diligence. From the interview, you'll find out a lot of good stuff. The background check there is really to support it. So, questions to consider. If you're doing them or you're not doing them, it's always good to kind of take a look at it and make sure the program that you have is the right program for you at this time. Next, trends, current and upcoming. Ban the box. I'm guessing most of you have heard about ban the box. If you haven't, it's right there. Disallowing a criminal history question on employment applications, running a criminal check only after a job has been hired. Salary history. This is recently coming up where some cities are beginning to look at, some states are beginning to look at not allowing a recruiter, an interviewer to ask about current salary history or prior salary history, and we'll talk about why. Social media. Companies, recruiters gaining info on applications from social media. Social media, especially this last week, and you can see the power of social media, the information that can be gleaned from social media. It's probably becoming more of a powerful tool in many different areas, including the job search, the candidate search area. And post-employment screening. We talk about pre-employment screening, getting the right person on board, everything looks good, we've got them in. Are there situations where you may need to run a screening post-employment? And we'll talk about that. And then I'll talk a little bit about the trends in current federal, state, city, county laws. From what I've seen over the last 2 or 3, 4 years is that the trends seems to be moving towards leveling the playing field for all applicants. You talk about ban the box. You talk about not asking about salary history. In general, it looks like it's just trying to level the box. Everyone has as fair a chance as possible to apply for the same job and have the job be determined based simply on your credentials of experience, your knowledge, and things of that nature. Ban the box. So right now, ban the box. You've got more than half the states in the U.S. has some type of ban the box legislation. I think right now it sits at 28 or 29 states, including over 150 cities and counties. And that piece is kind of important. I'll get back to that later. The goal of ban the box is to provide a fair chance for applicants with criminal history by removing the conviction history question on the application and delaying it until after the job has been offered. Why is this important? It's important because according to these statistics, roughly 30% of men without jobs between ages of 25 and 54 have a criminal record. So other statistics talk about the recidivism rate as well that goes along with these statistics. Men and or women coming out of incarceration, having paid their dues, unable to get jobs, and then at a later point, being arrested and reincarcerated. The recidivism rate is very high, and so one of the goals is trying to lessen that and allow these people to become productive members of society. That's the goal. Is it working? Well, in front of you, I have laid 3 different papers that have been done recently. You've got the 2017 Ban the Box and Public Sector Employment, the 2016 National Bureau of Economic Research, and the 2017 the Boston Federal Reserve Bank. The first one, the 2017, basically its conclusion was in the public sector, banning the box can work. It's working. In the private sector, not so much, and the results reflect what you see down in the studies from 2016 and 2007. It's not working in the private sector. Actually, people with criminal histories, their employment is actually decreasing. So it's actually having a negative effect. Why is that? Let's talk about the application process for a moment. So you need a new employee. The process looks something like this. You're placing an ad, you get a resume, you do a phone interview, fill an application, you bring them in for a first round of interview. Typically, you may bring them in for a second round of interviews. At that point, you like the person, you offer them the job, now you're running a background check. Now you get the criminal history piece of that run. And the background check comes back with something that keeps this employee from being a good fit for the job that they are applying for, and you're not able to move forward. What has happened here? Time, energy, effort, resources, you get to a point and you're almost having to start back over from scratch. That's the concern from the private sector. So what's happening? Well, if you look at the 2016 paper, it says right there in the middle, when employees cannot access an applicant's criminal history, they instead discriminate more broadly against demographic groups that are more likely to have records. So what they're doing is they've been burned a couple times, so they're looking at these resumes and they're looking at these applications and they're trying to guess which one probably has the criminal history and which one doesn't. And the ones that they don't think would, those are the ones they're pursuing because they don't want to go through this process. It's resource intensive, it costs money, and they have budgets. They have a bottom line that they are concerned about. Why is it working in the public sector? Well, the public sector is not as concerned about the bottom line as the private sector. The public sector can take their time in going through this process and go back if necessary and do it again until they find the right candidate. So the private sector, more concerned about time, energy, and effort, bottom line. The public sector, not as much, which allows them to take the time to do this, to find the right candidate, and to be able to employ them. This is a part of the presentation where I give you a picture. If you're like me, looking at words gets old fast. So here's a picture. This shows you what right now the United States looks at. The dark blue, states cover public employees with regard to ban the box. That kind of lighter brown state covers private employees. There's not very many of those, as you can see. And then the darker orange, other local policies, no state law or policy. These are the states that have city or county laws. And then the gray, no state or local policy. The word that comes to me when you look at that is fragmented. and I imagine it will remain so for some time. But the other things that come to me when you look at this, and maybe to some of you, is that the businesses with multi-locations that work in multi-states, this can be a nightmare. You're now having to potentially track different employment application types in different states, different counties, different cities, and you're running the background screens at different times in the application process. What I've talked to several companies, clients that do this, and they basically relegated themselves to do the lowest common denominator. So they basically have just removed the box from all their applications in all their states to streamline this and to take away the resource administrative headaches it would be to try to follow in all the different states, cities, and counties. Salary history. So the salary history question basically is, the theory is just this in front of you. It's aimed at closing the gender-based pay gap. So we've all heard recently the Census Bureau has done studies that, you know, depending upon the type of position, the experience of the position, women earn between 80 and 87 cents per dollar that men earn. The theory is that by basing salaries on previous wages, employees will continue the pay disparity. So a woman comes in for the same job that a man does. The woman says, you know, I got paid $65,000 in my previous job. The employer's probably going to pay that woman somewhere around that area. You know, maybe a little bit of bump, but somewhere around that. So maybe 65 to 70. A man comes in and says, I've been paid 75 for that job. They may get offered somewhere between 80 and 85. That's the theory, is that it continues to perpetuate as companies look to stay within the salary ranges of what the employees are bringing to them or currently own. You can see here that New York, the city of New York, implemented this in 2017. Massachusetts is looking to do this in 2018. 8 other states are considering it. However, Philadelphia wanted to implement it. They were sued by the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia. This is now in court, and I imagine this lawsuit potentially could have an effect on how this rolls out to different cities and states. It depends upon how far this lawsuit goes. But this is something that is being considered, and potentially you could see in the near future when you are unable to ask about salary history. Social media is very interesting. Social media continues to grow. It continues to be used more and more businesses as they promote their business. It's a form of marketing for them. But, you know, we also see social media being used by our president. It's being used more and more by politicians, other people to get their viewpoints across, to get their, you know, beliefs across. So there's a lot of information out there in social media. The one word I have here really is to be careful, because there's some laws in place that kind of restrict what you can do and what you can get with regards to social media on an applicant. There are federal and state laws that do restrict some of this. You cannot request logins from an applicant for their social media profiles. It's a federal crime to discard any terms and conditions of any social media platform. For example, Facebook includes a privacy clause in their statement. There's more information on these types of laws that cover social media in the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So if this is something that interests you, there's a lot of information out there on the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act that can give you more information on this. We're also seeing increased legislation activity regarding social media, and that legislation is leaning more towards more restrictive, more private for the user, more restrictive to third parties trying to get information off of it. One thing I would advise that if you are using social media to look at applicants, use the same social media on every applicant. You cannot have Jim Bob come in and apply and say, Jim Bob looks good, I'm not checking this. And then Joanne come in and he said, you know, there's something about Joanne. I'm going to go check her Facebook profile. If you're going to check it for one, I highly recommend checking it for the other. If you're checking 3 for one, I highly recommend checking 3 for the other, bearing that they all have profiles on those 3 social medias. Obviously, they all don't, but keep that as uniform and as possible. Focus on the public information pertaining to that particular job. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for information that pertains to the job, pertains to the information the customer has given you in their resumes, their employees given you on their resume and on their application. The biggest issue here is the potential for discrimination, that you find something that potentially has something to do that is protected and that it is being used as a reason to turn an applicant down. I don't like the faith that that person belongs to. I don't like that specific religious group that that person belongs to. I didn't realize this person had this national origin. I didn't realize that. I had no idea. There's discrimination concerns from what you're finding, and then the decision that's ultimately made about that information you're finding. So be careful on that. Only look for information that really pertains to the job. Now, the one place where I'm probably going to get in trouble here is this last one, and I just felt I needed to add it in. Really based on what we've recently seen in Charlottesville, Virginia. And the question is, can you hire, not hire, fire an employee for belonging to a certain group outside of work? And I wanted to cover this, again, because of recent events, and I think it's important to know. And here's what I found that I hope it gives you at least some information to start with if you look for these kind of things. Number one that I have found that from an attorney, Michael Eastman, who works for the Center for Workplace Compliance out of Washington, D.C., I thought this was very interesting. The First Amendment's protections of freedom of speech apply only to government, not to private employers. Private sector employers do not have to allow employees to voice beliefs other workers may find offensive. But government employees may not be able to fire employees who are participating in protest. If you are a private employer, you have a lot more leeway with regards to this than a public employer. Most states are employment at will states. What that means is that employees can be terminated for any reason as long as it is not an unlawful reason. There's a few states that have a few more restrictions on this. I've seen it called lifestyle discrimination statutes, where you can't really, take it to that extra level of looking at their outside curriculum and basing that and taking that and using that to not hire or to fire someone. The recommendation there was to have a very strong non-harassment policy. That non-harassment policy can include activity outside of the office space. In fact, non-harassment initially was one of the reasons brought around is when workers would go wait on these conventions. So a good, strong non-harassment policy can also be very beneficial here with regards to this. But in the end, according to Barry Holstein, attorney in Littler, Colorado, is that if you find someone belongs to a particular group, but they are not exhibiting any sort of hateful signs, or not exhibiting any sort of prejudice against anybody, they're coming in and they're doing their job and they're not bothering anybody, you need to take it on a case-by-case basis. You have the right, employer has the right to expect that when an employee is in a workplace, he or she will contribute to an environment of mutual respect. If they're not, then you have the grounds. But take it on a case-by-case basis. So I kind of got into a law area there, right? I probably shouldn't have, but I thought this was important to the discussion with recent events going on. Social media can be a very, very important tool with regards to learning information about a person and how that applies to the hiring of a person and or potentially the firing of a person where you find them participating in certain groups outside of the workforce.
Hey, Darren, can I offer just one thing? This is Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll make it very brief. Remember, for those who are, Darren is absolutely right, and I agree 100% with everything he has said about the at will and all that type of thing. Just remember that if you take that avenue with an individual, remember for unemployment purposes, misconduct has its own statutory definition. And even though you may have a perfectly good reason to dismiss that individual on an at-will basis, that will not necessarily guarantee that it will result in a disqualification of unemployment. So just wanted to draw that comparison in that real quick. So now I will shut up. Thanks, Darren. Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's a great point. You know, there are some companies out there where even if there's a gray area, the issue may be such that they're just willing to take the risk, that this person is such a disruptor, maybe not even just for the employees, but with their customers. The customers understand what this person is involved with, that you will see companies out there that just say, you know what, we're just going to take a chance and we're just going to let this person go and deal with the consequences. So to your point, Jeff, that's completely right. And I think some employees are willing to take some risk. All right. Drug tasting. Why did I put this on here? Well, first of all, what's the goal of drug testing? Catch the issue before having to deal with it. Catch the issue before you hire them. You spend all this time training them. They're on the job, and then you find out later that they've had a drug issue. You find that it has slowly began hurting their work, and now you have to work them out of a job. So the goal is to try to catch this up front and deal with it up front before having to deal at a later time. But the reason I brought this up is because overall drug use is increasing. And with drug use increasing, positive drug tests have increased. You have increases in medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and opioid use. I mean, they're actually calling it an epidemic now. Increase in cocaine use is up the first time in 10 years. I've also read that I think it's heroin use is also open up, but I don't have that statistic. Recent studies shows that drinking and alcohol abuse are also increasing in the United States. That's why the potential for increased drug testing is out there. More states are passing laws to allow for recreational marijuana use and that same medical marijuana use. Nevada just became the 5th state. But one thing to remember with all these people now freely able to smoke pot is that marijuana is still illegal under the U.S. federal judgment. So under federal law, marijuana use is still illegal. And what does that mean? Well, what it means is that it's still legal for employers to test their employees for marijuana and refuse or terminate employment based on failed screening, no matter what state an employee lives in. Marijuana is still considered a Schedule I controlled substance under the Federal Controlled Substance I Act. So you may be able to smoke it recreationally, but your employer still has the right to test you for it and still has the right to, number one, not hire you, and number two, to terminate your employment. So I just wanted you to be aware of that as marijuana use grows, testing, maybe even specifically marijuana, may also grow as well.
There's an incentive right here.
So, you know, a couple other things under here, you know, the type of drugs basically dictate who needs to be drug tested. You know, your basics, your commercial drivers, the people operating heavy machinery, those in the healthcare industry that have access to so many drugs, those are good examples. There's a lot of good examples out there that where people are operating in such that drug use could have very negative consequences, whether on their lives or the lives of fellow employees and or customers. So when they take the drug test, applicants need to make aware at the facility that they are taking for medications, because drug tests can also come up with different, yes, there's the 5 and 10 panel drug test. The 5-panel drug test can come up with things like heroin, codeine, morphine, crystal meth. The 10-panel, which is basically everything the 5-panel is, plus a few more, can also detect Xanax, Valium, Epion, weight loss drugs. So it's got these sort of things they can test for, but they can also find traces of a whole bunch more of different prescription drugs, which is a big concern anymore in this society. So the 5-test panel, the urine test is the most popular. The 5 and 10 ultimately are the ones that are done. The urine drug test is the one that's mostly done. But I will say this, if a positive comes back, I would make sure that if and when it comes back, that it's analyzed by a medical review officer to verify authenticity. So make sure that the results, you know, a prescription drug may be detected and come out of something else, and that's where an MRO can determine, yeah, that's the prescription drug's coming out. That's fine. That's within these limits. That's okay. This drug test is a negative. This person qualifies to go on to the next step. So a simple positive test on a drug test maybe should be reviewed by a medical review officer just to make sure that positive is an actual positive and it's not showing something else that is a prescription drug by a doctor taking correctly. But again, the drug testing, I think there's a chance it can increase because I just see drug use increasing. Now, if you're in a company and you're not seeing any sign of this, great. There's no reason to start enacting a drug test. But the reality is that adding a drug test to your background screen, if you're not doing a lot of them, the cost is not terribly more. If you're doing a ton of them, yeah, overall the cost could definitely lead to some additional extra expense. Again, you talk about the word liability. It's all about liability. But again, just wanted to throw this out there because drug use is increasing. And more than likely, if you're not drug testing your employees, you probably have some employees that have some of these drugs that would show up on some of these tests in their system. There's probably a good chance. And so we're getting close. Post-employment screening. There's continuous screening, which is sometimes referred to as infinity screening, continual screening, or rescreening. You know, continuous screening, that sounds very, very intrusive. You certainly have some government agencies, those with government contracts, those that work with children, those that work with, you know, disabled, those that work with those that cannot take care of themselves. Those are examples of where continuous checking makes sense. But you will see what more than likely will happen is that it's not going to be continuous. There are going to be things that pop up that might make sense for a drug test to be done. You know, again, it all depends on liability. Your company may have changed. You may have taken on a different product, and there's something with this product adds an additional amount of liability. And boy, we might need to run, you know, these people who are now handling this product, maybe run through one more time. just to be safe because, hey, it's been 10 years since we've hired Brian. Now Brian's in charge of this. We might need to do one more just to see if anything will pop up. You might get requests from third parties. I've seen this happen twice with some of our customers. We had a customer in the financial industry where their bank is requiring them to run their customers against terrorist watch lists annually. We have a customer where their commercial insurance is asking them to run criminal checks against their employees yearly. And I think the biggest reason why is because their employees work with children under the age 18 on an annual basis, and they constantly are working with them. So you might have third parties that are requesting this from you, and you may have no option unless you don't want to work with that third party. But again, those third parties, they are getting probably pressure from somebody above them, and that pressure is flowing down to you to do these checks. And on the final one, status change. You know, according to a report by HireRight in 2014, 29% of companies rescreen do so in response to a status change within the company. And I list some examples below. You know, promotion, more responsibility. This person now has access to cash, now has access to bank accounts, now has access to sensitive data, has access to personal information, whether it's in the IT department or it's in the HR department. You know, a job change within the organization where this person now is customer facing, now is involved with children, elderly, or the disabled. And then you have your higher public profiles, your VP or C-level executives, your new board members. These people are the face of your company. These people potentially could cause embarrassment if word comes out that they have recently had some sort of criminal activity on their background check. Now, criminal activity doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't get that promotion, but I recommend the company at least be aware of it if they do the promotion, so that if any response does come back from a competitor, public, whatever, that you're ready for it. You do not want to be blindsided by somebody asking you about a criminal activity of your new C-level executives that was just promoted 2 months ago. So they do it for public perception. So those are examples of where once you get the person onboarded, they are an employee, you might need to do a screening at some point in their employment that makes sense. And then the last one, I just want to talk about law changes, not necessarily a type of law, but it kind of gets back to this fragmentation that I showed you on this map. So in the first two, you've got the EEOC in 2012 offering new guidance. You've got the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was formed from, and it was born out of the financial meltdown of 2008-2009. It also has its fingers in the FCRA, background checks, and things of that nature, and so they updated some consumer forms in 2013. State of California, statewide change. Ban the box. New York City, implementing the salary question. Over 150 cities and counties. So the point here is that you've got the FTC, who oversees the Federal Trade Commission, or is the Federal Trade Commission, who oversees the FCRA, which is the Federal Credit Reporting Act, which is really the main act that background checks operate under. You've got the EEOC. You've got the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You've got the CFP. So you've got multiple departments at the federal level that can make changes. You've got states making changes on their own. You've got cities making changes on their own. You've got counties making changes on their own. Fragmented. Multi-level lawmaking, fragmented. Again, this hurts mostly those offering multi-state, multi-location businesses, and it makes it much more difficult. So with that being said, I talked a lot. I apologize for that, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions and misguide you in any way I can.
Does anybody have any questions for Darren? Give it a minute here. I know that Darren would be very happy to answer any questions that you may think about after the presentation. His information is here up on the screen, and if you need ever to get a hold of him, you can always contact me, and I'd be happy to put you in contact with him. So if there's no questions, making sure that we didn't have any typed in, I will, Darren, very much. It was very informative. Appreciate you doing this presentation for us. We will see you all next month.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
And Jeff, thank you for the opportunity. And if you'd like to answer anything, email, contact me. Happy to help try and answer any questions you have.